morning, Coastal Community Church. Week 6 of COVID quarantine. Can you believe this? This is spoiler alert 5. Just wanted you guys to know that we're going to be doing communion this Sunday. Make sure you have your communion supplies on hand at church, and we hope that you're doing well. Remember to call us if you need us for anything. We're here for you. We love you. Right now, we're about to jump into a period in between during the Judges' time, just before the kings are being laid out for Israel. I hope you enjoy this. Let's get into the book of Ruth. The story of Ruth is set in the time of the Judges, and it's just a fascinating story that just plays out in front of our eyes as we read this. You know, God does his miraculous work, even in the midst of this crazy time in Israel's history where they're doing what is right in their own eyes, and they're battling for this land that he's given them. And yet we see this desire to do things really against God in a rebellious way, still chasing after these other religions, these other false gods. And yet, in the midst of that, the story of Ruth is birthed. And if you've never read this story, you need to. It's a very short book. It won't take you but about 10 to 15 minutes to read it. So go ahead and read through it, because it's just a beautiful story. And it's one of these stories I want to point out. We learn some truths about God here, and I think the big thing that he wants us to see is this loving God, loving people concept. This guy, this landowner, Boaz, is going to really portray this loving God and loving people narrative, and he's going to be a redeemer and help this lady, this Moabite named Ruth. And it's important for us to see the big picture of this book as we are going to skip this book and go towards Samuel after this. But this story fits right into the narrative, so let's look at it briefly. Ruth is a Moabite. The Moabites come from Lot. Lot was the father of the Moabite people, and he kind of had religious upbringing with the Lord through Abraham. So there were some very similar beliefs. Theological beliefs, even they even had some similar kinship. So they're not too far separated from the people of Israel, but yet they are distinct and different and considered outsiders because they were very conniving people. They were very competitive with Israel. They were, still worshiping some of the false gods and other gods, just like Israel was doing, but they were more contentious and more of a thorn in the side of Israel during these days. And this Moabite woman comes out with her mother-in-law, Naomi, after a great famine had taken the land, and their husbands died, and now they're kind of left in this predicament. And Boaz is going to be their redeemer. And so we're going to see that take place. And through this story of redemption, the key part of this story in Ruth is we should be fighting for justice, doing what is right to help people, and this redemptive nature of God and the redemptive nature of us as his followers play out. And we should just take notice of that. And also, God uses this moment to show that this kind of outsider, this Moabite woman, is also going to be a figure in which this story of redemption is going to play out further, because she's going to come into play with King David. And then from King David, the Messiah, she is in the line of Jesus. And this comes from this beautiful story. So take a moment to read it and get to know it. We're going to see her give birth to Jesse, and Jesse in Bethlehem would birth and be the father of King David. All this is tying together, and the authors is setting this up in between the period of the Judges and where we're going to be the desire for a king. Is he's setting it up how this kingship came to be and how God redeemed this, and the redemptive character and nature of God brought this redemption through this Moabite woman this outsider, and that she's going to be part of the process in bringing the line of the Messiah, not only in King David, but ultimately Jesus himself. Now let's look at 1 Samuel for a minute. So now let's look at 1 Samuel. This is an interesting book as well, as we start to see how God is moving us, and the texts and the scriptural writers are moving us in this direction of what this king perception was going to be like before God's eyes, as well as man's eyes in Israel, and how this is all going to play out and work out. And they're leading us through the narrative of how this actually came to be. And 1 Samuel, we start to see this lady named Hannah, and I think this is another beautiful picture. We have back to back these stories of women, Ruth and now Hannah, who is now begging before the Lord because she can't have a son. This biblical theme of these barren women who are desperate, calling out to the Lord, and God answering their prayers. And Hannah was one of those beautiful pictures of God's grace, and then her ability to be used by him to help incorporate what he was going to do in the nation. And so we see here Hannah crawling out before the temple of God. She's not able to have a child, and she is just desiring this baby so bad. And she goes to the temple and she cries out and gets on her face before God. And the prophet Eli comes out and asks her what's wrong. And she goes, I can't have a child and I desire one so bad. And he puts a blessing over her and says, all that you have been crying out for, it will come to pass. And sure enough, Hannah gets pregnant. She has a child, and she dedicates that child to the temple service, to the work of the Lord, and she names him Samuel. Hence the book titled Samuel. And he's going to be used as a priest of God to mediate many different things going on. But this initial story is just so crazy because in this story we see Eli, who seems to be a good guy, but he has failed to kind of raise up his children in the way that they should go, especially in the areas of the temple. And they seem to be mocking the temple and not taking it seriously. And you know, even Eli himself seems to, kind of just be neglectful. And then this young boy, Samuel, is raised up in the temple. And as he's laying there one night, it's one of my favorite pictures. It's so dramatic, but it's so purposeful that when you start reading in chapter 2 of 1 Samuel, um, especially around verses 27 through chapter 3, we see a very interesting picture unfold. And it's like the temple is being abused, and God is not happy with how things are going on. And it says in there that the light of the Lord was almost out. It was like it was dim. That's in chapter 3, verses 3. And this is a picture that God's presence wasn't magnified the way it says. It was like it was dim because he was just unhappy and his blessing was not resting in the temple. And he calls out to Samuel, and Samuel is going to become a priest that is going to be used by him to do many great works, to really bring honor back into the temple. And I just want to close out with this. As you study, I hope you guys are studying, these passages as we lead into each week, that these passages are very powerful. And verse 3 of chapter 3, it says that the lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was laying down in the temple of the Lord when the ark of God was, and the Lord called out to Samuel. One of my favorite passages is that in the darkest times, it was almost like the light of God was going to leave the temple, the it's not really the temple, but the tabernacle, and God brings and restores hope through this boy, through this faithful lady named Hannah who cried out to God. And you can read in chapter 1 her song to the Lord, how beautiful it was when she sang, when she rejoiced in her son and she gave thanks to the Lord. But we also see this this redemptive, this hopeful restoration of the tabernacle, the inner workings with Samuel, and this light that had not gone out yet. God spoke, and in verse 5, Eli hears this or sees this, and instructs Samuel on what to say. And Samuel responds like most of the prophets do, like most of the people do in the Old Testament as well as New Testament. When God calls, Eli instructs Samuel to say, "Here I am. Are you available?" And he responded, and God spoke and began to work through Samuel. And he's going to be the prophet that helps bring in the kingship and to help the people of Israel to see how this kingly figure is going to work out. Even though God desires for himself to be king, he knows where the nation's leading. He knows their hearts already, and he's going to bring them to the point of understanding what a true king should be and look like. I hope you're having a blessed week, Coastal. Stay um, plugged in. Keep moving through your work. God bless you guys. And remember, when the Lord calls out as you're laying and as you're resting, as you're doing your work or your jobs, if he calls out to you, make sure you say as Samuel did, "Here I am."